Second Kings chapter 10, we have the Jehu has taken over the kingdom. He has killed the king. He's killed Jezebel in Second Kings 9. And we'll see this idea of wiping out. Okay, so whenever something is wiped out, you may see pictures of a war, a city that's been at war. And there's been bombs going off, and you would say that city is wiped out when there's no building left standing. All right. Jerusalem was wiped out, no two stones, the temple was wiped out, no two stones on top of each other, Jesus prophesied. And so when something is wiped out, you're expecting a complete destruction. So twice in Second Kings 10, we see this idea of wiped out. And so that's kind of our two main points from Second Kings 10. But before we get there, we think about false religions. Okay, there are a lot of false religions today, and if you look, some of them are relatively new. There's some that are only a couple hundred years old. Some religions try to go back and say, we are the religion from the time of Jesus. And some of the religions say, we are the religion even before that. And others are new because all the other religions they think are not true, and this is the true religion. Well, in our in our study of Kings, First and Second Kings, there's Baal worship. Okay. So Baal has gone, we'll say Baal in quote, because he's not real, right? He's gone nose to nose with God. And Elijah, so to speak, got called him out and said, okay, you get all of your prophets against me, and we'll get Baal versus God, right? And then what did that prove on top of Mount Carmel? What did it prove? It proved that Baal wasn't real. He couldn't do. Well, even the prophets of Baal thought that was a good scenario. Like, oh yeah, we'll show you Baal's real. And 8 hours later, however long it took, hours and hours, they were like, this. The Israelites are saying, we have been fooled. Baal is not real. Okay. So God and Baal have already, let's say, duked it out. It was a no contest, right? Baal didn't show up. Why didn't he show up? Because Elijah's mocking, right? But Baal's not real. Okay. However, Baal worship has continued because they got more prophets. Even though those prophets died, they got more prophets. Jezebel is still pushing this. Athaliah in the southern kingdom is pushing this. This idea that we ought to worship Baal because the nations around us are worshiping Baal. And Baal worship has continued, although Baal versus God has already been decided, and it was a lopsided victory. So why are people still following Baal? Then is the question that we have to ask ourselves. Whenever a false religion is exposed as false, why do people still keep following it? Why do people still keep listening to false teachers today, even if those false teachers are exposed as criminals, immoral, fraud? I mean, why do people still follow their teachings, still buy their books, still send them money? I think the same reason is why Baal worship continued, is that they like what they hear and they want this false religion to be true. Now, embedded, and I said this multiple times, embedded in this Baal worship is prostitution, male and female prostitution. So if you were to go to the temple of Baal, part of your worship would be immoral. Okay. And if you think, wow, this is a very exciting religion, we can go be immoral. And our God is pleased with that. Who doesn't who doesn't want this if you're not following the true God? And this is very exciting, right? It's like going to a nightclub or a strip club or something awful, we would say today, but this is a religion and this is what people want. Okay. So Baal worship continued because this is what people wanted. Even if it was false, they wanted something that was exciting, something that was life, something that is immoral. They want this to be true. This is why false religions continue today, because people want those false religions to be true, even if they're not. But keep in mind, spiritual warfare that we have heard about from Ephesians, we'll see it again in Ephesians 6. 1 Corinthians 10 reminds us that Paul says, I imply that what the pagans practice, they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 20. So behind the veil of false worship and false religion and idolatry is a participation with demons. And so all false religions, why? Because demons and Satan, we know Jesus exposed Satan as, and people that followed Satan as, you are your father, the devil. He was a liar from the beginning. I say anyone who denies Jesus has come in the flesh, anyone who denies the gospel, anyone who has a false religion, behind that false religion is a participation with demons. Paul said that in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 20, and it's true today. It was definitely true of all false religions back then. So this is why God says, I hate Baal worship. I do not want you to participate with demons. They are not going to help you. They are going to destroy you. Okay, if you were married and you went to worship Baal and you were immoral with a prostitute, whether your husband or wife, it didn't strengthen your marriage. It's destroying your marriage because you are being immoral. Okay, God knows what's going to strengthen marriages, and it's not participation with demons, it's not idolatry. And so God wanted Baal worship in Israel to be wiped out. And so Jehu does what he can to wipe it out. Now we're going to get up to the point where he has done what God says, but then God's going to give us an analysis of his overall reign, and it's not positive. Okay, so God doesn't always use people that are godly as instruments of his judgment. He uses an ungodly man here. Jehu's ungodly. He's an ungodly instrument, just like Hazael, king of Syria, is ungodly. But he uses these two kings to judge his people because of their idolatry. So 2 Kings chapter 10. And we have to remind ourselves, idolatry is never no big deal. Even if everybody's doing it, it is a huge deal. It is a huge deal as man, with Satan's or the world's or the flesh's influence, they replace God with things, with people, with self, which are not worth worshiping. 1 Kings chapter 6, 17, 18 showed very clearly that Baal was not worth worshiping, but people still kept doing it until 2 Kings 10. All right, 2 Kings 10, we'll read verses 1 to 17. Now Ahab had 70 sons in Samaria. He may have had sons or grandsons. Obviously, if these are all just first generation after Ahab, he's got multiple wives. Jezebel doesn't have 70 sons. But some of these, like the king, probably are the king who replaced Ahab, Jehoram, and Ahaziah were probably from, I say probably from Jezebel. And we're assuming that Athaliah in the south, the daughter, is from Ahab and Jezebel as well. So we don't know how many wives Ahab has. I don't think Scripture tells us, but he's got 70 sons. So if your dad was the king, you have a rightful, you're the heir to the throne. Now, if you're not the oldest, then your older brother's either incompetent or sickly, or he doesn't want the kingdom. And so you could become king, or like David and Solomon, your dad chooses you to be king, and Solomon has many older brothers, but none of them were king. Solomon was. So Ahab has 70 heirs to the throne in Samaria. Now, Jehu's not in Samaria, he's in He's in Jezreel, which is miles to the north. Maybe I looked at a map, maybe 20, 30 miles um, to the north. You probably have a map in the back of your Bible that will show you um, how how far they are roughly from here. We're in Drake to Boston. Okay. So Jehu wrote letters and sent them to Samaria, to the rulers of the city, to the elders, and to the guardians of the sons of Ahab. So in in ancient times, probably, and maybe it's like this now, that there is a house of Ahab. All of his sons are there. They're getting trained in all different types. Moses was raised in Pharaoh's house, and he had the best education, the best scholars helping him, tutors um, in warfare. They're studying all things that kings or kings in training would study. And so Ahab has been gone for 12 years. Jezebel now is gone, and they're not raising their own kids, their own sons. They've got guardians here, it says, that are raising the sons of Ahab, saying, "Now then, as soon as this letter comes to you, seeing your master's sons are with you, and there are with you chariots and horses and fortified cities, also and weapons. So you have some resources," Jehu is saying. Now, Samaria is the capital city. Jezreel's kind of like the summer home that Ahab and Jezebel would kind of go to escape. And you'll see other Herod the Great, the time of Jesus, had a summer home. This is off common today. Really wealthy people don't just have one residence, they've got multiple places. So Jezreel was the place of the summer or the retreat from politics, but Samaria is the capital. We've seen that in our interactions with Second Kings. Samaria is the capital, and this is where the king's sons, are living under guardians, being trained, being tutored. And so Jehu sends a letter and says, "Okay, you got all your master's sons there." Verse 3, "Select the best, the fittest of your master's sons, set him on your father's throne, and fight for your master's house." Okay, if you want to keep Ahab's line going, let's fight. This would be like a civil war. Verse 4, "But they were exceedingly afraid." It seemed like everybody's afraid of Jehu. "They were exceedingly afraid and said, Behold, the two kings could not stand before him. How then can we stand?" So he who was over the palace and he who was over the city, together with the elders and the guardians, sent to Jehu. They got together, they had a council, um, not with the son's influence, because they're going to die, saying, "We are your servants. We will do all that you tell us. We're going to be submissive to you, Jehu. We're not going to be loyal to the house of Ahab. And we will not make anyone king. Do whatever is good in your eyes." Okay, we're submissive to you. You tell us what to do, we'll do it. We're here to please you. Verse 6. Then he wrote to them a second letter. Okay, so there's a correspondence going back and forth. It might take a day to get a letter to them, it might take a day to get a letter back. So this is just a short amount of time, and there's these letters going back and forth. But probably all this happens within a week or a few days. Verse 6. Then he wrote to them a second letter and said, "Okay, if you're on my side and if you are ready to obey me, take the heads of your master's sons and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time." Now, this is gross and gory, but this isn't unusual. You'll see this throughout Scripture. When they want to kill John the Baptist, what do they say? Bring his head on a platter. Anytime you have someone's head disconnected from their body, this is evidence that they're dead and they're no longer a threat. When Goliath is killed by David, maybe he was knocked out, unconscious, but how does everybody know that Goliath is not going to come to, rise back up as a 10-foot tall man and keep fighting? David takes his head off. And okay, Goliath's done. All right, obvious. And so, how do we know that none of these sons are going to be alive, escape, and they're going to come back? So, and evidence, the most obvious part of your body that identifies you as you is probably your head. Okay, and they could be recognized. Okay, this is who we say they are. Okay, and so they say, "Okay, I want you to bring the heads of your master sons and come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time. So they've got miles to go. They've got to perform these executions, and then they got to bring evidence. Now the king's sons, 70 persons, were with the great men of the city who were bringing them up. And as soon as the letter came to them, they took the king's sons and slaughtered them, 70 persons, put their heads in baskets, and sent them to him at Jezreel. And when the messenger came and told him, hey, they have brought the heads of the king's sons, he said, okay, lay them in heaps at the entrance of the gate until morning. So not a long time. He says, okay, this is evening. We're going to have a ceremony or something tomorrow, of which he's probably going to stand near these piles of heads. Right, verse 9. Then in the morning, when he went out, he stood and said to all the people, you are innocent. It was I who conspired against my master and killed him. But who struck down all these? Okay, it sounds like he's trying to say, well, I didn't kill all these, but here are their heads. Okay, but we'll see God's analysis in verse 11. He says, know then that there shall fall to the earth nothing of the word of the Lord, which the Lord has spoke concerning the house of Ahab, for the Lord has done what he said by his servant Elijah. That is true. Okay, so what he says in verse 10 is true. What he says in verse 9 is a little bit deceitful. Like I wasn't responsible for killing all these guys. Yes, you guys know I killed the person on the throne. You know I killed Jezebel. But these, okay, so now there's no more threat to that Ahab's going to take over the kingdom, or Ahab's sons. Verse 11. So it doesn't say the men struck down. It says Jehu struck down all who remained. It was his idea. He struck down all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, all his great men and his close friends and his priests, and that probably priests of Baal, I'm assuming, until he left him none remaining. Okay, then he went to Samaria. So Samaria is south of Jezreel. And on the way, when he was at Beth Eked of the shepherds, Jehu met the relatives of Ahaziah, king of Judah, and he said, who are you? And they answered, we are the relatives of Ahaziah, and we came down to visit the royal princes and the sons of the queen mother. All right, queen mother, probably Jezebel. Relatives of Ahaziah, now they are related because Ahaziah is a grandson to Jezebel. Athaliah is Ahaziah's mother. Athaliah is the daughter of, I'm assuming, Ahab and Jezebel. Verse 14, and he said, take them alive. But it's not going to be good. It's not going to go well for them. And they took them alive and slaughtered them at the pit of Beth Eked, 42 persons, and he spared none of them. Okay. God never promised through Elijah or Elisha that Jehu was supposed to kill any of the people in David's line, but Ahaziah is in David's line. And you get your lineage through your father, not your mother. So that's why Ahaziah is of the lineage of David, and Jehu is not supposed to be killing these 42 people. Verse 15. And when he departed from there, he met Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, coming to meet him, and he greeted him and said to him, is your heart true to my heart as mine is to yours? Okay, this is the first mention of Jehonadab. You'll see him again in Jeremiah 35, his descendants, and he's like the leader, kind of like, it's almost like the Amish or the Mennonites, where they follow a very strict code, passed down from hundreds of years. Jehonadab is the father, and we'll see when Jeremiah is writing about them that they're not drinking wine. They also don't buy land. They don't build houses. They live as nomads in Israel. When Israel's taken over, they move south into Judah, and the people around Judah know of these men as well. Jehonadab's their first generation, their leader. And it sounds like he's true to the Lord, and Jehu's not taking him out. He says, okay, Jehonadab, is your heart true like mine is? All right. Jehonadab answered, it is. And Jehu said, okay, if it is, give me your hand. So he gave him his hand, and Jehu took him up in his chariot and said, And he said to him, "Come with me and see my zeal for the Lord." So he had him ride in his chariot. And when he came to Samaria, he struck down all who remained to Ahab in Samaria till he had wiped them out, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke to Elijah. So he gives, just to summarize, God's instrument of judgment wipes out all the leaders. Why is he wiping out the leaders, and what are they leading people toward? Toward idolatry, toward this false gods. And so God promised this would happen. Jehu mentions, "I have done what the Lord told me to do," in um, 10 and verse 10. And he promises through Elijah. Now, this is the second or third time that Elijah's name is mentioned, that God promised through Elijah. That's 1 Kings 21. You can go back and look and see that what God promised at Naboth's vineyard when Ahab and Jezebel killed Naboth and his sons and they took it over. Elijah shows up at the very time that he's trying to enjoy the fruit, probably the grapes of Naboth's vineyard. And Elijah says, "This is your lineage. Your line's coming to an end, and it's going to be disgraceful." And this is the final elimination, wiping them out. Okay, there's no one left. No one can say after this, Ahab or Jezebel is my grandfather, great grandfather. If they could, they could say, "Well, I'm the legitimate king." There's no one left of Ahab's line, just like there's no one left of Baasha's line or Jeroboam's line. Okay, and so completely wiped out. Jehu is God's instrument of judgment. Now, there are still followers of this false god. So that was the leaders of the false god. Now the followers, that's verses 18 to 28. Then Jehu assembled all the people. And so this is in Samaria. This is probably the location of the temple of Baal. And he says to all the people in verse 18, "Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much." Now, Jehonadab has to know that that is a lie because he tells him, "Come see my zeal for the Lord." Verse 19, "Now therefore call me all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers, all his priests. Let none be missing, for I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live." I'm going to kill anyone who is missing, but we'll see why he's bringing them together. He's not bringing them together to worship. But Jehu did it with cunning, so he's lying, deceit, in order to destroy the worshippers of Baal. And Jehu ordered, "Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal." So they proclaimed it. And you can imagine messengers going out throughout the whole kingdom, bring all the worshippers for Baal. We're going to have a great sacrifice to Baal. And Jehu sent throughout all the Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came, so that there was not a man left who did not come. And they entered the house of Baal, and the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. We don't know how big this house was. We also don't know how many people there are, but probably hundreds, if not thousands. And he said to him, who was in charge of the wardrobe, "Bring out the vestments for all the worshippers of Baal. Give somebody something to wear that would help them to worship Baal." So he brought out the vestments for them, and when Jehu went into the house of Baal with Jehonadab, so Jehonadab is still there watching all this happen. Jehonadab is, from what we can tell, faithful to the Lord. We're not sure about Jehu. And he said to the worshippers of Baal, "Search and see that there's no servant of the Lord here among you, but only the worshippers of Baal." And they went in, and I'm assuming he verified that there were only worshippers of Baal there. And they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. These are counterfeit, similar to the sacrifice and burnt offering that Israel was supposed to offer to God. And Baal, if you look up Baal, likely represented as a cow. That's my limited searching what he looked like. Now Jehu had stationed 80 men outside. These are probably soldiers, and says, "The man who allows any of those to whom I give into your hands to escape shall forfeit his life." All right, so he Jehu uses deceit to lure all the followers to their death. And then what does he use to convince the soldiers to execute? He uses a threat. "If you guys let any of them go, you're dead." And now how does Jehu come across in these two chapters we've seen him? Everyone is scared of him. Everyone knows he's a loose cannon. If you defy him, he does not care if he kills you or not. Okay. He's an executioner, really, is what he is as a king. All right, so he stationed 80 men outside. They did. They were under threat, verse 24, verse 25. So as soon as he had made an offering, end of the offering, the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guard and to the officers, go in and strike them down. Let not a man escape. So when they put them to the sword, the guard and the officers cast them out and went into the inner room of the house of Baal. It's almost like the temple, but there's an inner room, like a counterfeit holy of holies. And that's probably where the most sacred place of Baal worship was. And they brought out the pillar that was in the house of Baal. It could have been, we don't know exactly what it looked like, but I'm assuming it was made of wood. If it's made of metal, they had to get this fire really hot to burn and melt the metal down to nothing. They burned it and they demolished the pillar of Baal and demolished the house of Baal. And they made it a latrine, a restroom to this day. This is where Baal was worshipped, and this we're just going to use it as a bathroom. Like, this is the most disgraceful thing that Jehu could do to this house of Baal. Now, Baal doesn't exist. It's just people's imagination. This is how false gods are invented and worshipped. And so, completely demolished, burning it. The sacred parts of this temple they bring about, they completely gut this building, and now it's just used as a bathroom. Verse 28, thus Jehu wiped out Baal from Israel. And that's good. And we would be thankful. What if Elijah watched this, or if Elisha heard about this, they would have been grateful that Baal worship was done. So he used wisdom in desecrating this location, and he accomplished God's mission for him. Deuteronomy, I'm just going to read a few verses for you about what God wanted to be done with false idolatry. Deuteronomy 7, verse 5 says this, but thus shall you deal with them in destroying idolatry. Thus you shall deal with them. You shall break down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and chop down their Asherim. That was the female deity with Baal, and burn their carved images with fire. So what God said, I want you to do in eliminating idolatry when you go in and conquer the promised land in Deuteronomy 7, that's what they're doing here. After they conquer the promised land, Baal worship comes in. Jehu does what Deuteronomy 7:5, what God expected them to do. In First Chronicles chapter 14, when David conquers the Philistines worshipped god Dagon that was similar to Baal. First Chronicles 14, verse 12 says this. I'll read verse 11. And he went up to Baal Perazim, and David struck them down there. And David said, God has broken through my enemies by my hand like a bursting flood. Therefore, the name of that place is called Baal Perazim, and they left their gods there. So the Philistines left; they left their gods there, and David gave command, and they were burned. They burned their gods. They collected all the idols, and they burned them. Other kings, they took their idols and tried to worship them. It didn't go well for them. But David does what Deuteronomy 7 was expecting. And then Second Chronicles chapter 14, Asa, when he becomes king in Judah, chapter 14, verse 3 of Second Chronicles. After Abijah sleeps with his fathers, Asa his son rules in his place. Verse 2, and Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. He took away the foreign altars and the high places and broke down the pillars and cut down the Asherim and commanded Judah to seek the Lord. All right, so we see when godly people are ruling that they are destroying idolatry. They're doing it in a way that it can't be set back up. Whenever you burn something, break it in pieces, melt it down, it can't be reformed, okay? It can't be like Dagon fell over, set him back up. We're going to keep worshiping him. No, whenever he's completely eliminated, and they eliminated all the people in Second Kings 10 who even worshiped him. So God accomplished his mission. If you read Hosea chapter 2, Hosea writes maybe 100 years after this. Hosea 2 talks about Baal worship, and I have verses 16 to 20 here for us. And in that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. This is after idolatry is eliminated and people are restored back to God. You will call me my husband, and no longer will you call me my Baal. Like Baal worship was so influential. Whenever you try to worship God, you would use Baal's name, and God did not want that to happen. Verse 17, for I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, and they shall be remembered by name no more. And I will make for them a covenant on that day with the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens and the creeping things of the ground. Like God's going to control all of nature, the animals around Israel. And I will abolish the bow and the sword and the war from the land, and I will make you lie down in safety, and I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in steadfast love and in mercy. And now we know the story of Hosea where he marries someone who is unfaithful to him, and he goes after her and he brings her back. This is a picture of God with his people. And I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. So God wipes out idolatry so that we will cry out to him alone, so that we will trust him alone, so we will know him alone, so we will serve him alone, and so that we will love him alone forever.